You know, for more than 3 decades before this incident occurred, there was an ongoing rivalry between fans of Team Canada in hockey and what they call the European or Russian style of hockey. Many times we played internationally, either we couldn't play with our best players, or the referees were hampering the teams by calling a European game during a North American contest. Now, this incident is unofficially called a Punch-Up In Piestany, and it was probably one of the most dramatic bench-clearing brawls in the history of sports, or, well, hockey. And the majority of participants were underage. No joke. This was a incident that occurred between Canada and the Soviet Union during the final game of the 1987 World Junior Hockey Championships in Piestany, Czechoslovakia, which is now Slovakia. Now, the incident resulted in the ejection of both nations from the tournament, and while the Soviets had already been eliminated from medal contention, disqualification cost Canada a medal and possibly the championship. The brawl is famous for officials having turned off the arena lights in a desperate attempt at ending the 25-minute incident. Much of the blame was placed on Norwegian referee Hans Rønning, who had been selected for the game based on the perceived neutrality rather than experience. Following the brawl, the International Ice Hockey Federation suspended the players involved for 18 months and the coaches for 3 years. The players' suspensions were later reduced to 6 months on appeal, allowing several players from both teams to return for the '88 tournament in Moscow. Both nations won medals in '88. Canada, in a revenge title, won the gold, while the Soviets won the silver. Now, the brawl dramatically raised the profile of the World Junior Hockey Championships in Canada, where it is now one of the top events on the annual sports calendar. And for the uninitiated Americans that are people on my feed, usually last week, what we call Boxing Day week into the new year. And this is heavy ratings either on TSN, Sportsnet, the major networks. Now, the patriotism displayed by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation analyst and Donald Trump sycophant Don Cherry in the aftermath led to a sharp rise in his own popularity with Canadian fans, because him and longtime CBC announcer Brian Williams were commentating from the home studio on it. Cherry basically was taking up for the Canadian players, while Williams said, you know, you can't go through life putting in pure six brawls. Don Cherry wrote this all as his worth. And the only reason why he was kicked off the airwaves, because he still does a podcast, his racist comments in 2020, 21 are not really accepted, but back then, it was par for the course because it was a different time, different place. Now, numerous players in the game went on to skate in the NHL, including the great Brendan Shanahan, Theo Fleury, Mike Keane, Sergei Fedorov, Alexander McGillney, Vladimir Konstantinov, and the alleged superstar of the brawl, New Brunswick's own Everett Senepa. Everett is a great Aboriginal athlete in the Brunswick Sports Hall of Fame. Allegedly, from what I saw, he might have fought between 4 and 9 players during the brawl, but then again, the lights were off, so if you really look, 4 for sure, maybe as high as 9, but we'll get into that in a few seconds. Now, Canada and the Soviet Union had engaged in an increasingly intense rivalry since the Soviets first emerged on the international scene by winning the 1954 World Hockey Championships. Now, from 63 to 83, the Soviets captured 17 World Senior titles amidst repeated accusations from Canada that their teams were made-up professionals masquerading as amateurs. The accusations eventually led to Canada boycotting all World Championship and Olympic hockey tournaments between 1970 and 1976. Finally, the 72 Summit Series were organized, pitting the Soviets All-Stars against the Canadian All-Stars, and Canada won 4-3-1 in 8 contests. The Soviets did win a second Summit Series against the WHA 4-1-3 in 74, but the Canada Cup tournament, Canada won in 76, and Soviets won in 81, we won in 84, yada, yada, yada. So Canada won 4 Canada Cup titles, where all the major world powers were invited, with the Soviets again taking 81. Now, top Soviet clubs also toured North America in the WHA and NHL golden years, and this was known as the Super Series. Now, the World Junior Championships were formally created in 77, and to that point had been dominated by the Soviet Union with 7 titles. Until 1982, Canada sent either a Memorial Cup champion or an All-Star team. Now, 82 was the first time Canada sent a national junior team on the auspices of Hockey Canada's Program of Excellence, and he won the title as he did in 85. Now, the Cold War culminated in 87 with Rendezvous 87 as the Soviet national team played a 2-game series against the NHL All-Stars in replacement of the All-Star game for the NHL. They split 2 contests. Now, the 87 Canada Cup followed and was won by Canada 2-1 in a 3-game series against the Russians. The third game is considered one of the top contests in hockey history, which was won by Mario on a pass from Wayne Gretzky. Now, this leads up to 1987. There was a lot of hype about this tournament because not only Everett Sandoval was considered, again, one of the top Aboriginal hockey players in Canada of his era. You had Mike Keane, Shanahan, Pierre Turgeon, Alexander McGillney, some great players playing, especially in the Finns and the Swedes. Now, this was a round-robin tournament. The teams with the top 3 records won the gold, silver, and bronze medals. Now, Finland had finished their schedule with a 5-1-1 record to lead the tournament. Now, Canada entered the game with a 4-1-1 record and already been assured the bronze. A victory against the Soviets would have guaranteed Canada silver, and a victory of 5 goals or more would have won the gold medal. Now, the Soviets entered the game 2-3-1, had been eliminated from medal contention, and you had nothing to lose. Now, the matchup between the 2 squads was deliberately scheduled to be the final game of the tournament, as organizers expected at least one of the teams would be playing for the gold medal. Now, when Ronning was assigned as referee for the game, it was based on his neutrality despite his inexperience officiating at the international level. Now, upon hearing of Ronning's assignment, Canadian rep Dennis McDonald sought out double IHF supervisor officials Rennie Fossil, hoping to convince him to select a different referee. Aside from the question of his competence to call the game and its magnitude, they were concerned about Ronning following an earlier game in a tournament he officiated between Canada and the States. A wild brawl had broken out during the pregame warm-ups against the Americans 3 days earlier. The officials were not on the ice when the melee occurred. However, Ronning ejected one player from each team at random for starting the ball. Canadian captain Steve Chasseau was thus barred from the game against the Americans, even though he did nothing wrong, as well as the following game after being assessed a match penalty. Unable to convince IHF officials to change the assignment, McDonald was concerned how the game would be played. Ronning's inexperience at the level was later identified as the significant cause of the brawl, as several stick infractions by both sides had gone uncalled, causing anger to rise between both teams. You're looking at a bunch of young men under the age of 21 with sticks in their hands, where Canada and Russia not getting along. There was a language problem, stir, rinse, repeat. Now, on the opening face-off of the game, Sergei Shesterenkov elbowed Canadian Dave McElwain, who responded by cross-checking the Soviet player. Neither player was assessed a penalty. 5 minutes in, the great Theo Fleury scored the opening goal for Canada. Now, in celebrating the goal, he slid across center ice on his knees, acting with his stick was a machine gun, and pretended to open fire on the Soviet bench. Canadian Amateur Hockey Association President Murray Costello later called it an inflammatory act, completely unnecessary, lacking any sort of respect. The first period continued in similar fashion, with both teams repeatedly slashing their opponents and Canada emerging with a 3-1 lead. So let's set this up. They're up by 2, they need to be win by 5. Interviewed by the CBC during the intermission, Fleury described the atmosphere on the ice. The boys are up for the gold medal, everybody is tense. Tempers are flying, it's really tough out there. I can't believe it. It's so tense. Now, early in the second period, the game was paused for a moment of silence in memory of 4 Swift Current Broncos players who were killed when their team bus crashed in Saskatchewan 5 days previous. Now, because of this, there was a drop in intensity in the 5 minutes of play that followed. However, just after the 6-minute mark, following a minor scuffle that sent 2 players from each team to the penalty box, the teams resumed shoving and slashing at each other. Each team also scored a goal, giving Canada a 4-2 lead halfway through the game. Now, the brawl itself began after a face-off as Shesterakov collided with Senepa, our New Brunswick hero, with 6:07 left in the second period, resulting in a fight between the two. Now, Soviet player Pavel Koshikin also leveled a 2-hand slash at Fleury, leading to another fight. The battle quickly escalated into a line brawl involving all skaters on the ice for both squads. Now, returning from a commercial break, the great Canadian commentator Don Whitman, understanding the severity of the fighting, noted that, well, we have had a real skirmish just moments ago following a face-off. Evgeny Davidov was the first player from either team to leave his bench to join the melee, prompting all players from both teams to leave their benches. So here we are in the corner of the rink. Every player that's on the bench is on the ice. Sanapa, Fleury, Keane, all the key players are getting into fights. Now, Mike Keane, he paired off against Valery Zelepukin, with the Canadian fighting like it was for the world title, according to Fleury. In another fight, Vladimir Konstantinov leveled a headbutt that broke Greg Hogwood's nose. Brendan Shanahan later described it as the greatest headbutt I have ever seen. Stefan Waugh was pummeled by two Soviet players, which Whitman had mentioned. The remaining players paired off as the officials attempted to break up the fighting. Now, from what I saw, Sanapa and Keane were moving through the crowd. Sanapa, I saw him in at least 4 fights, maybe as many as 7, but Keane was basically looking, at the time he had reddish blonde hair, with no helmet, he was looking for somebody to fight. Now, there was at least a dozen separate fights over the entire ice surface, including the 2 backup goalies. Now, unable to control the situation, Ronning and his linesmen left the ice under the orders of Czechoslovakian officials. In a desperate attempt to end the brawl, tournament officials eventually had the arena lights turned off. You can see it on the YouTube video, leaving the players to fight in the dark as the fans whistled loudly in disapproval of the entire situation. That was a thing in Europe that if you didn't like something, you would do a high whistle. The whole stadium shouted, my Chechem hockey, which translates to we want hockey, we want hockey. By the time our fights had broken up, the IIHF declared the game null and void, which gave Finland the title, and you can see the Finnish players celebrating in the what they call the quiet room outside the ice surface. Very, very bizarre. Now, the IIHF held an emergency meeting in the arena office to decide how to handle the incident. Each team was represented by a delegate, and the meeting was chaired by IIHF President Gunter Sabatky. The delegates voted 7-1 in favor of rejecting both teams for the tournament, the lone dissenting voice being that of Canada's Dennis McDonald, who brought up the fact that Ronning should never have been a referee in the first place. He was incensed by the voting. Finland, Czechoslovakia, and Sweden all stood to gain medal position by voting the 2 teams out, and the Americans only promised support if other nations supported Canada, and Sabatky could barely control his disdain for the Canadians. After voting to eject the 2 teams, IIHF officials banned the Soviets from the tournament banquet and medal ceremony, but still invited Canada. McDonald stated the Canadians were not interested, and Sabatky and Czechoslovakian officials ordered the Canadian team out of the arena within a half an hour. They were met by armed soldiers who escorted them across the border and out of Czechoslovakia. The IIHF voided the individual standings of both teams, and in the words of McDonald, it was like we were never here. However, the other teams kept the points they gained in the matches against both teams. Now, both teams attempted to blame the others of allowing the violence to get out of hand. Soviet official Anatoly Kastrukov blamed the Canadian traitor for igniting hostilities by running over the Soviet bench and punching one of their assistant coaches in the stomach. The Canadians, meanwhile, pointed to Davidov being the first off the bench as being the spark that led to the brawl. Now, CBC commentary Don Cherry was one of the first to float a conspiracy theory that the Soviets had done so as a deliberate attempt to have Canada ejected and therefore lose a medal. I don't really believe this. I think basically the Soviets had enough reason to hate us. Had nothing to do with stopping us winning the gold medal, because why in the name of God would the Soviets not want to beat Team Canada on the ice? They live for that. Now, Alan Eagle suggested that the IIHF decision would have been different had it been the Soviets in contention for a medal and not the Canadians, which is a faint comment by a convicted embezzler. But, Soviet Administrator Yuri Korolov expressed regret that the incident occurred but did not admit any guilt. He felt that the game should have been finished instead of both teams being disqualified from the tournament. But here's the deal, ladies and gentlemen. You fought in junior at that level. You had to be ejected, so you're not going to call up 20 Canadians or 20 Russians, the B team, to play the final game, so it would never work in the first place. Now again, the IIHF voted to suspend all players involved from competing in international events for 18 months and all coaches for 3 years. The player suspensions were later cut to 6 months, which allowed eligible players to participate in 88, and of course Alexander McGillney to play in the 88 Winter Olympics. The IIHF also considered either demoting both teams to the B pool or banning them from the 88 tournament as further punishment, but backed off as the next year's tournament was set, of course, to be held in the Soviet Union, while Canada represented the only media revenue the tournament generated at the time. Among the Canadians, only 2 players were not suspended: goalie Jimmy Waite and forward Pierre Turgeon. If you look very closely, Turgeon did not fight, and Jimmy Waite was hanging out with the other goalie with the Soviet Union, looking at the problem. Now, one of the Canadians, Steve Nemeth, was on the ice along with Waite, but neither threw a punch. Waite felt he could not risk being ejected for fighting under belief that the game would resume, and the Canadian backup goalie, Sean Simpson, who was in the brawl with the backup player for the Soviet Union, was injured. Nemeth would later apply for early reinstatement, arguing that he was not fighting, but trying to help break the players apart. Turgeon was the only Canadian who did not initially leave the bench until Canadian head coach Bert Templeton convinced him to go on the ice. Regarding not leaving the bench, Turgeon stated in 2007, "That wasn't my job, I didn't have to fight." Many of their teammates never forgave Turgeon for failing to defend his teammates. In the words of our Everett Sanapa, "I'm looking for someone to help Stefan out, and I look over at the bench. There's this dog Turgeon just sitting there with his head down. He wouldn't get his ass off the bench. Just sitting there when everyone's off the Soviet bench, and at least one of our guys is in real trouble getting double teamed." Don't know why Stefan Raw was singled out, but that's for the miss of time. Now, at the 88 World Championships, Canada was first, Soviet won the silver, and each team's roster featured numerous players from the 87 tournament. Now, since the 87 championship, the two nations have maintained their dominance of the Worlds. Canada's won 15 gold medals, while the Soviet Union successor Russia has won 6. Now, Roning's assignment to officiate the game was viewed by other on-ice officials as a nod to organizers from Lillehammer, Norway, who had just won the right to host the 94 Winter Olympics and were reserving the game. At age 38, Ronning expected the 87 tournament to be among his last international assignments. He never officiated another international game, although he did referee 2 more seasons in Norway before retiring. Now, in Canada, public sentiment widely supported the players. Opinion polls taken in the aftermath of the brawl saw upwards of 92% of respondents supported their actions. Again, Don Cherry's passionate defense of the Canadian team led to a sharp increase in his popularity. And Toronto Maple Leafs owner Harold Ballard, another outstanding guy like Don Cherry, had special gold medals made up for the Canadian team. Ballard stated that "I believe the Canadian boys deserve a gold medal, and I'm going to see if they get them." Imagine how these Russians engineered this whole thing over there just because they got a lousy team and were scared to go home finishing in 6th place. I don't think Russians had a lousy team that year. It was just some of the other teams in that campaign were stronger. Now, Canadian hockey officials criticized the players for the brawl. In 2005, the suggestion of a reunion for the 87 team was met with uncomfortable silence, and I don't think so, from Hockey Canada officials. Immediately following the tournament, Canadian officials were seen as trying to distance themselves from the team. The Canadian Amateur Hockey Association didn't do anything for these kids. Reporter Jim Cressman said, "These kids were good enough to make this team. They gave up their holidays, did their best, risked getting hurt, and ended up on the wrong end of a bad decision, and the CAAHA basically handing them their tickets." Winnipeg Jets assistant GM Mike Smith was in a Vienna airport when the Canadian juniors were waiting for their flight and took the opportunity to criticize them for their play at the tournament as well as the brawl. Now, before Piestany, the junior tournament had a small following in Canada. Only one Canadian reporter flew overseas to cover the 87 tournament. That changed in 88 as the major Canadian media outlets all sent reporters to Moscow. The tournament's prestige in Canada continued to grow, and by the 2005 tournament, over 100 Canadian reporters covered the tournament in Grand Forks, North Dakota. And I can tell this to you as a sports editor for many years in New Brunswick. From 1988 to 2010, the World Juniors at one point was the biggest hockey tournament in the world. until the Worlds and the Olympics got bigger. The only reason why the Olympics got bigger because the World Juniors had carried the ball for years. Now, the brawl itself was seen as an embarrassment by Soviet officials who prided themselves on the discipline of their teams. The only fight I remember between a Russian and Canadian player was Roger Bear and an unnamed Russian in Game 8 of the Summit Series at Luzhniki in '72. Now, a senior official, Anatoly Korshakov, said the Ice Hockey Department and the Ice Hockey Federation of the USSR will soon analyze the Soviet team's performance at the championship, and those guilty of the incident will be strictly punished. The Soviet media agency, Telegraph Agency of the Soviet Union, was highly critical of the coaching staff's inability to control the players. Head coach Vladimir Vasilyev was fired as the coach of the Soviet national junior team as a result of Piestany. Now, but Vasilyev had been North Americanized in his way, and he did what a junior coach would do in the Q or the OHA or the Western League. Vasilyev has never really stated on the record why he allowed these players to go over. Anyway, now of the 20 players who dressed for Canada that game, 19 went on to play in the NHL. Sean Simpson, the goalie, was drafted by the Capitals and dressed for 2 games for them, but ultimately only played for their minor league squads. In '87, only one Soviet player had ever played in the NHL, Viktor Nechiev. The players for this Soviet team would be among the first wave of Eastern Bloc players to arrive in the NHL with the fall of Iron Curtain, and 5 of them would eventually win the Stanley Cup. Now, talking about the Russians here, you got Mogilny, Fedorov, Zelepukin, Galchenyuk, Sheshnikhanov, you had Popov, you had Davidev, Konstantinov, Malahov, some really good players. But Team Canada that year, great list bears repeating. Sean Simpson, Greg Hogwood, Glenn Wesley, great player, Steve Chasson, Chris Joseph, not Curtis, Kerry Huffman, Luke Richardson, Yvonne Corriveau, Theo Fleury, former Montreal Canadiens captain Mike Keane, the great Everett Sanapat, Dave McElwain, Pat Elyanouk, Scott Metcalf, Brendan Shanahan, Steve Nemeth, Pierre Turgeon, Stefan Roth, Dave Latta, and Jimmy Waite. Now, if you have a chance, go on YouTube, see the whole brawl from start to finish. I don't know if the complete game is available, but there's been various documentaries on TSN. But there should be a full 30 on 30 on this. Now, getting back to Everett Sanapat, okay. I'm a proud New Brunswicker. I'm a Acadian Métis. I'm proud of all our Aboriginal athletes. But the thing is, I've rewatched the brawl. Okay. I'm not exactly proud. Proud is not the real word to say it. But he showed a lot of pride in Canada for taking up for the flag. At the time, the Canadian flag on the jersey there was like a triple Canadian flag with a hockey stick. It was very impressive. But all I know is that he saw something occur. And of all the players on the ice, again, he was the one that was trying to tell the Russians we're not going to be pushed around anymore. He talked with his fists. And people say he took his gloves off. Some people say he didn't. Don Whitman said he had still his gloves on. I really don't know. I haven't talked to Everett. So if anybody knows if Everett Sanapat kept his gloves on during the fight or didn't have his gloves on, let me know. There's a lot of still mysteries. But all I know is Everett Sanapat is a goddamn 24/7 legend among hockey fans in New Brunswick like me. Not only for the brawl, he looked great in a Chicago Blackhawk jersey. He looked beautiful in a Nordic jersey. Done a lot for his representative communities in the province. And like I said, he's a genial guy. He's done a lot for sports. And it all comes down to the fact, if Everett Sanapat, say like Don Cherry, if Everett Sanapat wasn't on the ice for that game, it wouldn't have been the same. The reason maybe all the Russians were scared specifically of a Sanapat, and that's why they got so excited. So listen, thanks for listening, ladies and gentlemen. This is a little bit longer than my normal podcast because there was a lot going on. I didn't want to break it up in 2 parts. I'm sorry I didn't do the anniversary podcast of this a few days ago when it was the anniversary. But, 35 years have gone by. And when you hear the word punch-up, we don't take it a video game anymore, if you know what I'm saying. Have a good day. Bye.